Now we'll talk about resolving 7/7 chords. And of course, when we talk about the 7/7, we're referring to the 7 chords that are based on the leading tone of the key. And of course, in major, that's a given because it's built into the key signature. In minor, of course, that means we're going to be thinking even more intently about the need to raise that 7th scale degree to really make it a leading tone. And I think that's probably the reason your book spends so much time calling this a leading tone 7th chord, because I want to reinforce that idea that we're working with the raised 7th scale degree and the 7th chord built on that note. Okay, so what I'll do is I will do one example of resolving these in parallel keys. But I think as hopefully you'll start to see, the 7 diminished 7 chords really make more sense in terms of dominant harmonies in minor than they do in major. I mean, they're used in major, but I don't think they're used nearly as liberally. And in any event, the 7 diminished 7 in minor keys gives us some more things to look at that makes it a little more interesting as well. So here we are in the key of E flat major. I'll do at least one major here. So I've started off, of course, with my 1 chord. I've moved that into a 6/4 chord, a 4/6/4 chord, and then I've let that wander over to my 7 half diminished 7th chord. Notice that in a major key, it is a half diminished 7th chord. Okay, so now let's figure out how to resolve this thing. Okay, I like one of the things I like about the book is by calling it a leading tone 7th, that really gives you a big kind of flashing light on what the root of that chord really does need to do. So because we're in root position, of course, that the root of the 7 diminished 7 is in the bass. Okay, which is just one more way of explaining that the bass does in fact, or the leading tone does in fact need to resolve upward. Okay, so I'll get that kind of taken care of right off the bat. Now, because it is a diminished chord, that means the underlying triad has that tritone, right? So I'm trying to get myself really well trained to look out for the tritone. So the tritone is going to appear between the root, which is the leading tone, and a diminished fifth somewhere above that, right? So if it's a diminished fifth above a D, I know I'm looking for an A flat, which I happen to have here in the soprano. Okay, so my A flat will come down. Since the leading tone went up, A flat, okay, goes to a G just like that. Okay, now some of this is going to feel very familiar to resolving 5/7 chords, right? In fact, the 5/7 chord and the 7/7 chord, they overlap by 3 pitches. So in terms of the scale degree resolutions, we're going to see very, very similar things. Remember how in a 5/7 chord, this would be the chordal 7th, right? Even though it's the chordal 5th in 7/7. But even so, we're going to go ahead and resolve that down as the 4th scale degree. Okay, so that'll resolve down. If I look at the tenor, I recognize the tenor as being the 2nd scale degree, or the re, or back in the 5/7 chords, it was a 5th. It was a 5th of the chord. Well, even though it's a 1/3 of the chord now, it's still going to behave in much the same way. And we like to take that 2nd scale degree, right, and bring it down to the 1st scale degree. So there's that one. Okay. So just to kind of take inventory as I'm navigating myself to 1, I'm going to make sure I take care of a root of the chord. So E flat, need a G, and a B flat, okay? And if I can, I want to go ahead and double that root. Well, it turns out I've done that doubling in the tenor and the bass, so the root's all taken care of. I've got the chordal 3rd in the soprano, okay, so that's good. And so now all I need is not just a B, but actually a B flat, okay? And it turns out the B flat's not far away from the alto. So just bring that down a step. Okay, and now it looks like I'm finished, doesn't it? Because it behaves a lot like a 5 chord. Well, this is another example of where we don't want to be in too much of a hurry, because look at what I've done. Got a 5th between the tenor and the alto, and both of them move in the same direction by the same amount, giving me those dreaded parallel 5ths, okay? So I've got to figure something else out. Again, it is a dominant harmony, so a lot of it's going to feel very familiar, but how do I keep from getting that parallel 5th, okay? Well, let's figure this out. I can't really do a whole lot about the bass note in this instance and the soprano note. That's that tritone which we really want to see resolve. So it's a matter of figuring this out from in this case, the inner 2 voices. Just because of how it happens to be voiced here, right? So the root of the 7th chord and the 7th of the 7th chord, those are pretty well committed. It's figuring out what to do with the 5th and that 3rd. Okay, so here's what I can do. Check this out. I can go ahead and allow the alto to do what I had it doing before and navigate to a B flat. Okay, but then what about the tenor? Well, watch what I get to do when I'm resolving 7/7 chords. I'm going to resolve that tenor up, right? Which, back in the days of the triad, we're all kind of aghast at this point, because what I've just done is I have just doubled the third in a major chord, which we spend a lot of time learning how to navigate ourselves around, right? We've learned that we can get away with it in minor chords, but in major chords, it's just kind of one of those forbidden things. But when you're leaving a 7 half diminished 7 chord in major, it's almost inevitable to avoid what I would consider bigger voice leading issues in getting to that parallel fifth. Okay, so let's give ourselves a sense of what that sounds like. Here's my key of E flat tonicized. Here's my tonic triad. Remember, I'm doubling the root on the same pitch. Right, there's my bass and tenor. Okay, so there's my one chord. Okay, let's listen to that again. Listen to that resolution from the 7 half diminished 7 to the 1. And because of the harmonic pull that I get from the 7 diminished 7, my ear isn't awfully offended by the doubled third, right? I think some folks might be a little more bothered by that than others, but it will certainly sound better than if I were to do that parallel fifth. Let's see if I can show that example here. Right, you hear that? Here it is again. Listen for those middle voices. Okay, so when we're resolving 7 7s, we'd much rather double the third, whether it ends up being a major tonic triad or a minor tonic triad. We'd much rather double the third than create a parallel fifth. Okay, so now let's see how that plays out then in the minor. Very similar construction here. We're just really changing it over to the minor mode. Okay, let's go for the same kinds of resolutions. The leading tone resolves up. Okay, the chordal seventh and soprano resolves down. Now let's see if we can apply the same kinds of thinking we were doing before in the major to the minor here. Okay, let's see what happens if we take the alto, resolve it down, and resolve the tenor up to double the third of our one chord here. Okay, so let's play through that, see how that works here. Here's E flat minor for our ears. So here's my one chord. Sounds pretty smooth. Let's hear it again. All right. So one other thing I want to point to while we're looking at these 7 diminished 7 chords in a minor key, which we can just call 7 fully diminished. And it's going to help us justify this doubling of the third in the minor mode. Okay. Remember how I took time in the major to look for that tritone, which I had between the D and the A flat. Okay. Well, it turns out I have that same tritone present here as well. But that's not all. Check this out. One of the things that's really unique and exciting about the fully diminished 7th chord is I have not just one set of tritones, but I actually have two. I have another tritone between the tenor and the alto, which of course is voicing a C flat, right? So the C flat against the tenor's F. That gives me two sets of tritones, which means now I get the chance to do this tritone resolution thing twice. And sure enough, that's exactly what I've done. The tritone between the middle voices creates a fifth, which that's the kind of tritone I tend to want to resolve inwardly, right? So I bring the upper note down, the lower note up, okay? And of course, as we discovered, the tritone between the D and the A flat and the alto is also a fifth, right? Separated by an octave, but in any event, it's also doing a very similar resolution inwardly. Okay, so the really unique and exciting, well, to me at least, exciting thing about the fully diminished seventh chord is I have two sets of tritones I get to resolve. And when I'm doing proper tritone resolution in both voices, what I end up doing is I end up doubling that third, and so that helps us justify it. Let's see if you can hear those two tritones as I play through this once more. So let me highlight those tritones we get between the two pairs of voices. In the bass and the soprano, we have the D to the A flat. And then in the tenor and the alto, we have the F against the C flat. Okay, that tritone resolves inwardly, as does the tritone in the outer voices, resolving inwardly. Okay, and as a group. So once more in context. Okay, so we're going to see that featured, at least this pair of tritone intervals in all of our different versions of 7/7, in all the different inversions rather. So let's take a look now at the first inversion. So here's an example of an arrival to a first inversion of a fully diminished seventh chord in the key of F sharp minor. Okay, so I've got my one chord. I traveled from there to a 1/6 chord. Okay, and then I'll arrive at a fully diminished seventh chord in the first inversion, and then we'll talk about how to resolve that. Okay, so I know because it's a what the book calls a leading tone seventh chord or fully diminished seventh chord, that I'm going to have a couple of things happening. I'm going to have two sets of tritones, and one of those tritones is going to include the leading tone. So let's see if just that information helps give me a sense of how to resolve this thing. Okay, so my leading tone in the key of F sharp minor is going to be an E sharp, which I have here in the soprano. Okay, so before I get too far, I want to go ahead and find its tritone buddy. The E sharp is going to form a tritone with the B, which in this case happens to be in the alto. So let me go ahead and just resolve that. Why not? Okay, E sharp resolves upward to F sharp. Okay, B is going to resolve, better stem. B is going to resolve downward to A. Okay, because I've got the tritone really now, it's stacked here as an augmented fourth, so those are the ones that resolve outwardly. Okay, okay, so that's one set of tritones. So I'm going to theorize that my other tritone is in the lower two voices. Well, let's take a look. Okay, I have a G sharp in the bass set against a D in the tenor. Sure enough, that's a tritone. Okay, so the G sharp is going to resolve up because now this particular tritone is a diminished fifth. So let's see what happens if I resolve the G sharp up to A, and the D down to C sharp. Okay, so in terms of my understanding of tritone resolution, as I'm trying this out, I'm thinking, okay, that should work. I've got two sets of tritones, which I've resolved each pair in contrary motion. So let's see what it sounds like. Let's get F sharp minor in our ears. So here's my chords. Notice the voice exchange here. Okay, here come my tritones. Okay, that seemed to resolve really well. Let's hear it again. Okay, and of course, before I'm finished, I want to make sure I include my label on that last chord, which is a 1/6. Okay, so this nice thing of the double tritones, it's really exciting because it gives us like this really strongest sense, as you can imagine, within tonality of this dissonance, this aching chord that has to resolve somewhere, not just because of the influence of one tritone, but the influence of two of them. Okay, so that's what's for me really exciting about the fully diminished seventh chords. And now we'll look at how this plays out in a second inversion of fully diminished seventh chord, so a 7/4/3. And this is going to be our final one. The fully diminished 7/4/2, as the book explains, it's just not that common of a harmony. It's rare enough that I think that we'll get by just looking at the root position in the first couple of inversions. But I do want to use this one as an opportunity to show you something kind of exciting, a different exciting thing about the fully diminished seventh. Okay, so here I am. I'm in the key of G minor. I've navigated from 1 And I'll go ahead and pull out my 2 half diminished 6/5 now that I'm a pro at using that, and have that resolve to a fully diminished 7th chord in second inversion, right? So a 7/4/3 chord. Okay, so here I am. I want to go ahead and resolve that. Let's go ahead and try our double tritone resolution. Okay, I know I'm in the key of G minor, so I'm going to be on the lookout for my leading tone and its accompanying tritone. Okay, or its accompanying voice that creates a tritone. So of course my leading tone is an F sharp, which I have here in the tenor, creates a tritone, as I can see with the bass. It's an augmented fourth, so this will be a tritone that resolves outward. So I'll go ahead and take care of that. Okay, F sharp resolves up to G. C is going to resolve down to B flat. Okay, so that's one tritone. And then my other tritone, as I would expect, is here between the upper two voices. I've got an E flat against an A, and that creates a diminished fourth. So this is going to be another one that should resolve outwardly, with the alto resolving down from E flat to D, and the soprano resolving up from A to B flat. Okay, notice once again how what I've done is I've doubled the chordal third in my 1 chord, or in this case it's a 1/6 chord. Okay, so let's take a listen to that, then I'll show us one more thing about these things. G minor sounds like. All right, so here I go. One thing I want you to notice before I move on, and in fact I should have marked this, but I have between the 2 half diminished 6/5 and the 7 fully diminished 4/3, I actually have not just 1, not just 2, but 3 common tones, right? So listen how easy it is to kind of go between those 2 harmonies. Here I go again. Okay, so that's a really exciting way to resolve from that predominant smooth motion into a super dissonant, fully diminished 7th chord, and then resolving on a 1/6. But that's not the only thing I can do with diminished 7ths, as I've seen in these examples. Another way I could do this is by stepping back and recognizing something here. Remember, the fully diminished 7th chord is it's a pretty close cousin of the 5/7 chord, right? In fact, if I were to try to spell a 5/7 chord, right, in the key of G minor, I would need a D, I would need an F sharp for my 3rd, I would need an A for the 5th, and my chordal 7th would be a C. Well, check it out. There's the A, done. Okay, the E flat's not part of this group, but there's the F sharp, and there's the C. So it turns out the only difference pitch-wise is a D, which would be present, but in fact it's taken over by this E flat here. So watch what I could do if I really, really wanted to. Instead of resolving straight to 1, I could take that E flat. Okay, so, and this of course would be the 5th of the chord, and I could transform this thing. By moving this down a half step, I've just moved from a 4 fully diminished 4/3 to a 5/2 chord. Okay, and of course I know how to resolve that. Okay, my tritone, now I've only got 1 set, and that's here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and resolve the tenor up. Half step, okay, which means the bass comes down. Okay, oh, I should really move these over so that it's creating a new harmony. Okay, so I'm on the way to creating 1/6. This D now gets to sustain as a common tone. Okay, and the soprano is going to come down to help us out by doubling the root. Okay, so let's hear that sound. So when you hear that, what do you hear in that 3rd chord? Does it sound like a 7 fully diminished 4/3 to you? Or maybe it sounds like that E flat, rather than being a chordal thing, is just kind of lingering over from the previous chord, and it really reveals itself to be a true member of a true 5/2 chord, right? Listen to it one more time. So this is where we get into this realm of interpretation, right? Some of us may hear that as, you know, a 7 fully diminished 4/3, and then the D in that case, it may or may not represent to our ear a full transformation into a 5 chord. It really might just be a way of anticipating the arrival of the 1. Right, but to others, of course, it'll sound like that E flat is kind of the embellishing pitch there, and it's really a 5/2 chord, right? So different ways of interpretation here. But in any event, this gives us a number of ways to look at resolving the 7/7 chords.